Hello, in this video I kind of want to start talking about the last set of videos that I want to do considering Baudrillard and thinking about Baudrillard, which is how to answer Baudrillard affirmatives. I think that this video can be extremely helpful because I think that people from all different types of backgrounds find trouble being able to really answer these affirmatives. I often hear in a lot of like high scores or people that come out of debating these things the first couple times that they're just like, I have no idea what happened in the debate. I don't really know what they said, and whether or not like they won or lost, there's still this kind of confusion in the air on like what they really should be doing or focusing on beyond just checking off like the general things that you should be doing against like maybe any critical AF or any type of like AF that talks about postmodernism, etc. And I think really talking about these things in depth is super important. And so obviously if you haven't, you should refer to the videos like I always say in order to really get a fuller context for some of the stuff I'll be talking about here, especially since this is closer to like the end of the series that I'll be doing. So some of the stuff that I'll just be kind of like mentioning casually, or terms and stuff that I'll be mentioning casually, I do so because they're kind of talked about in the earlier videos and I don't really have as much time to just like re-explain the wheel on them. But in this one I'll kind of be talking about first how I think you should answer Baudrillard affirmatives when thinking about how you answer them on case and framework and topicality arguments. I think that both of these are really interesting places to start how you answer these affirmatives, and I definitely think the case page is a place that is like massively important just because of like how important like the thesis type of arguments that are being made on Baudrillard are to the ability for them to like win or lose a debate. I think that against a lot of these affirmatives, there are a lot of times where you can win and lose a debate on case, and I think that obviously if you're a policy team, being able to successfully or know like what is really important to go for when trying to go for T is like incredibly important for how you're able to make a strategy against this affirmative in general. And so I kind of want to start the conversation just talking about case. I think that case is particularly important when you're debating these affirmatives just because of how focused these affirmatives are at the level of trying to win their thesis values a way to structure the world. And I definitely think you need to start the debate here. Even if at some point it's just like starting off with generic arguments about why Baudrillard is wrong, that's fine as like as a term of like evidence basis, as long as you're making the types of claims that you want them to. Because I think that when you start like talking about this evidence, you can obviously start analogizing some of the arguments that are made in the evidence to like different types of examples and warrants that are outside of it. And I think that that can be really helpful in terms of maybe making your arguments, even if they kind of sound generic at first, more specific as the debate develops. But I think just covering your bases in terms of trying to win some base reasons that Baudrillard is wrong is a good place to start, as long as you're also figuring out a way to connect those arguments to like the type of strategy that you have holistically. So how are the indicts that you're making of Baudrillard important to the type of strategy that you want to go for in the 2 hour? Or do you think your indicts of Baudrillard are just so good that you really just want to go for like Baudrillard is bad or a presumption against this type of affirmative? Either way, I think that it's just really important to think about like what purposes when you're really trying to go for something like this and use that as your starting point. Additionally, beyond that, I think that for teams that are especially more on the critical side, being able to differentiate between like the link arguments and the arguments you want to read on case against Baudrillard, or it can sometimes be really hard because a lot of the link arguments that you want to make are similar to that types of reasons you would say that the app would not work in the first place, and like are meant to be done in such a way that they're kind of like turning the app's ability to even think about the world and it does. And in that sense, you're kind of offering an alternative thesis. But I think on case, it's really important to maybe not spend so much time trying to like win like particular pieces of evidence about why Baudrillard is wrong on the critical side if you have a competing theory, but more so use that time in order to like really break down and go through each portion of like their evidence and their affirmative and try to figure out like what is the relationship that this affirmative has to the status quo and how does it depart from that status quo, not just like i.e. what is the goal of its departure, but like really how it gets there. I think that a lot of things that I think Baudrillard teams could like have a lot of trouble with, especially if they're trying to win arguments that are external to like things that are happening in debate, you can really push them on like how these things that they're saying translate to everyday forms of material violence. And I think the case page can be a place where you're really starting to indict the type of frame that they're using for how we should evaluate what is solvency and how we like think about criticism as a whole, making arguments that really force them to start the debate early on about how their AF relates to like the material function of the world. I think can be incredibly strategic for like making a sound strategy later on. And when I start doing and talking about some more of the case stuff in the next video, I definitely want to start talking about why I think like pushing towards a debate really based in materiality can really be really good as a criticism starting point for how you want to answer these affirmatives. But I think in terms of the case page, either way, just being able to like force the team to think of the applicability of such a theory broadly to like the way in which we navigate day-to-day life is like particularly important because it allows you to at least draw a place where there's tension for the judge and maybe a place where they can hold themselves, and that you can really start taking advantage of like all the types of ways in which thinking about materiality is kind of necessary for the process that we do within debate. And then I think when you're trying to go for a more framework or T-geared strategy, I think that the way that you should go for framework T is first of all explaining like the value of debate and understanding the procedural value of debate, even if you're not generating value and such that like debate does something, but thinking about like the ability to enter debate as a space where we kind of like agree along with like procedural norms, things that are done within tournaments, etc., and the ability to like articulate the kind of game value of debate as like necessary to being able to like test their theory. I think that you should always be able to explain why the kind of procedural benefits, even if they don't leak into being able to like be pedagogically valuable, that we cannot certify or deny or make possible, the types of claims that the 1AC will be making without the ability to thoroughly test them. I think that this argument can come off in like a couple ways. Sometimes I think it can come off extremely like generic and just come off as like a very generic true testing argument, but I think there is a value to thinking about like why maybe a strategy is geared towards just going all in to kind of like why something that sounds so generic is so important to the process of how we come to verify things like the affirmative can be a place where you find like a significant amount of offense just because of how ready the other team is going to be for the impact turn debate. And honestly, usually my advice in this type of area is that I think that you should kind of gear up for the same thing. I do think that trying to go super offensive with these affirmatives and winning that the way in which they may frame the resolution, the way that we should act in relation to that resolution is not valuable for how we think about the types of like pedagogies that we produce and the way that that materially affects politics. And much like I've said and how I think about policy teams should respond to Baudrillard in some of the videos where I was talking about Baudrillard on the negative, I think that you definitely need to be able to like push examples here where you're talking about the kind of efficacy of debate and politics broadly in order to disprove like some of the arguments that they're making thesis wise about the relationship between like signs and signifiers, etc. And I think being able to kind of apply those to some of the top level arguments that we're making about the value or non-value of debate is particularly important for how you want to generate offense here. A lot of people like I think sometimes really ask the question of like what is the value of thinking about the TVA. I think that TVAs are less valuable against teams that are reading team are less valuable against teams that are already doing radical mimicry, that are already kind of like reading plain text in a way that they're not defending them, because I don't really think it allows you to get really any type of nuanced offense out of the topical version of the app, and I don't really think it covers your basis because it's something that's already endemic to the process that 1AC is taking up. But I think in the context of Baudrillard apps that are planless or ones that like don't even take up radical mimicry as like their source of how they think about methodology, I think that plain text can be interesting. Ones that actually play on radical mimicry as a way that we should do debate could be like really interesting ways to like try to play with the way in which they're trying to frame the debate in the various uses of Baudrillard in different places. And I think that like maybe offering ways of thinking about how just starting with the plain text as a place for why you should get links to core counterplans and disads to justify that type of topical version of the app could be a really interesting road to walk down. Hopefully this video was helpful for you, and hopefully you'll keep tuning into the more and the last video that I'll be doing in terms of talking about Baudrillard. Thanks.